Today, we have a really fun session planned for you. We're going to explore the exciting and often challenging, ever-evolving world of AI in education and training. Our discussion will cover a range of topics, including how AI can be used effectively in educational settings for student role play, e-learning content creation, and more. We'll also touch on some potential pitfalls and ethical considerations that will come with integrating AI into educational settings. So looking around the room, and I know we're still growing in attendance as we move, I think you're probably here for one of a few reasons. You're in this room because you have a very keen interest in a lot of investment in AI, and you're looking for inspiration from like-minded individuals. You're terrified of AI, and you're looking for evidence to avoid it and to make sure that your colleagues and students do as well. Or, and most likely, given that you're at an EdTech conference in 2024, you have some experience with AI, and you're cautiously optimistic about its potential, while wanting to also be aware of challenges and opportunities that come up. Pardon? Everything. All of the above is also an answer that is applicable here. I do think that we are united in the fact that our thoughts about AI today are different than they were probably a year ago, certainly a couple of years ago, perhaps even a few months ago. And the thoughts that you have a few months from now are probably going to really differ too, right? It's just something that's constantly changing. I met with this group, I think for the first time about 6 weeks ago, and then we had a follow-up conversation a couple weeks later, and things look different, right? And so I think that's one of those realities, is that we can't really keep, but we can be a part of conversations like this to help us try. So before I introduce our panelists, I thought just by a show of hands, looking around the room, getting a feel for who's in it, it's July 10th, so we're about a third of the way through the month. Who has used AI this month so far? Okay, so just keep your hands up if you've used it this week. What about this morning? Okay, right, so we're pretty right, me too. Yeah, I should have had my hand up for all of those things. I definitely used it this morning. So frequent users, which is exciting to see. I did see that I think some folks didn't have hands up for any AI, which is also great to see and a really valuable part of this conversation too. I'd also love for you to raise your hand if you've used AI for designing and teaching. For administrative needs. What about with your students, or encourage your students to use it? Nice. What about like just to keep your life together? Menu planning, right? How to prioritize, how to have a difficult conversation with your boss, things like that. Really good mix of interest and experience. So my name is Lindsay Shipman. I will be your moderator today, and the Senior Manager on Product Enablement at D2L, where I focus on internal enablement and our first-time user experience. In addition to EdTech, I'm interested in personalized learning, building online communities, and exploring the potential of AI in education. To help us navigate these complex and fascinating topics, I am very happy to be joined today by 3 panelists, each bringing a unique perspective and a wealth of experience in EdTech and AI. Starting down at the very end there is Ronnie Storley. She is a learning experience designer and a multimedia developer at Los Angeles Pacific University. She specializes in creating media for online education and is passionate about making engaging learning experiences for audiences. She is going to be exploring some role play work, which I think is really exciting, and we know you're going to enjoy that conversation. In the middle here is Tony Nappy, and he is a learning experience designer at Lassiter Center for Learning at the University of Florida College of Education. He has several years' experience in developing and designing e-learning courses and educational grant projects. And Tony is interested in exploring the cutting edge of instructional design solutions and learning management systems strategies to empower learners and instructors through engaging and accessible learning experiences. And then finally, to my right here is Reed Dixon, who is currently the Director of Online Faculty Experience and Innovation at PIMA Online, where he teaches courses for faculty in online pedagogy, instructional design, and educational technology. Reed speaks on AI and the future of teaching, learning, and technology all over the place. 25 years of teaching and leadership. Reed has given hundreds of talks to designers, administrators, and tech leaders. So really great group of folks. I didn't do this, but I should have. So there you are. If we're looking for names as you think about that later. I don't get our conversation started today, but I am encouraging friends and colleagues in the room to be thinking of your own questions. If we do have time, that is my goal, that we are reaching out to you. There's nothing worse than having that burning question that you might not have time to address after if you're headed off to something else. So do be thinking about that, and I'll make sure that I pause and give you that opportunity. So one, just as we get started, your work today is different than it was a year ago. Much of that is fueled by advancements in and then access to artificial intelligence. Tell us what makes your work different now. What major AI initiatives you have been working on? And we'll start at the end there with Ronnie.
Hey, everybody. Testing.
Should be one, yeah.
So I've been working a lot with Character AI as a training tool in our courses. It's basically a free chatbot that's designed to act like real people, and it gives users a safe space to practice real-life conversation. And after receiving feedback that our courses have too many writing assignments, we've been incorporating more role-play activities. But the problem with that is not everyone is comfortable with role-play, or it can be challenging to coordinate in online settings. So Character AI became a really quick and convenient solution for all of that.
Hey everyone, I'm Tony. So my use of AI has been pretty limited in terms of how we integrate it within projects, like on a scale that is heavily involved in the total design of stuff. But I've been exploring using local LLMs, which, if you aren't familiar, OpenAI may have been one of the biggest and first to do it, but many other companies like Facebook and Google have their own versions of their LLMs. For example, Meta has a technology called Llama, which is open source. Google has their own version. So they actually supply these models for you to download on your own hardware to be able to run them independently offline without having to phone out and be connected all the time. So there's many benefits to that I can go in later, but I've been using it more for helping with creative ideas and how we present our content and come up with new interesting ways to create activities and content for learning.
So I'm Reed Dixon, and I try to use AI for everything. To be quite frank, to teach a class called AI for Teaching and Learning. We used AI to develop. I'm aggressively looking at pedagogical openings. And for me, both happen, we have all these opportunities to rethink the classroom, rethink teaching. AI similarly, I think, hits these little crevices where we see the cracks in our edifice, what is working, what's not, and gives us an opportunity to. So I use AI for virtually everything I do all day. I have ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and Hugging Face open. I'm always investigating them, knowing that they're fully problematic. It's simple.
Thank you. Definitely something that stands out there is thinking about how we re-examine the practices that we've done before. So I know as we look to someone like Ronnie, who's really had that experience with thinking about role play in that setting, right? What's I think really unique about that and kind of exciting is that we're using technology to better connect humans, right? To prepare them for those human connections. So definitely a place where I wanted to start as we think about some of the benefits of AI. So you talked a little bit about how you've been embracing it. If you could dig in a little bit more about some of those benefits that you've experienced and what that looks like, perhaps with that pedagogical framing or that connectedness, I'd love to hear more about that.
With role play in general, there are actually extensive studies on the effectiveness and the benefits of role play in the classroom. Some of them being better communication skills, increased critical thinking, and a stronger sense of empathy as our students take on different perspectives and different viewpoints really helps with data retention, in addition to strengthening relationships with peers and future clients of their given field.
You can ask one question, Mark.
Is it live AI that they're interacting with, or are you grabbing content and putting it into the role play?
It's live AI.
Really?
Yes.
It's fascinating, and you can, and I would encourage you, if you have time to spend some time afterwards, we have some really cool stuff that you can share with specifics. And so now as I think about those benefits, I'll turn to Tony, and one of the things that I'd love for you to highlight for us, Tony, is, and something that's probably unique from certainly my use of AI, is that essence of a local LLM, right? And why we would bother with that, maybe even what that is for some folks who might not be familiar with that. If you could explain a little bit more about that and the benefits of that.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, Meta has their own open source LLM called Llama, which is relatively not for the regular layman, I would say easy to install, but I use a front end called Ollama, which is not developed by Meta, it's just an open source technology that allows you to install models like Llama 3, but also basically everything on available from Meta and Google and Microsoft. So you can install many of these different models, each with their own, proprietary set of training data. Each model is I would say, depending on the billions of parameters that it's trained on, it could be anywhere from 3 gigabytes to, like over 10 gigabytes, depending on your hardware. But you can actually query several of these through Ollama. You can query several models at once. So if you have a response that you receive from one model, you can just ask it to 5 different ones at the same time. But one of the big reasons why one would want to use their own machines and be offline, so to speak, to run this AI is privacy. When you're using cloud services like OpenAI, I know they have different business relationships in terms of IP with many different customers and custom use cases. But when you're running stuff locally, you don't even have to worry about that. It doesn't connect to the external services where they can potentially, take advantage of any of your private data and exploit it. Another one is if you have a powerful computer, you can actually get better performance from these services, especially running multiple at once, than say being at the behest of cloud services. Some other good use cases, you can upload your own PDFs, Word documents, etc., that might be private for the IP that you're working in, and yeah, all that is just saved and able to be referenced later from previous conversations. ChatGPT, the new one, also incorporates all of this, but again, you're kind of subject to changing terms of service at any time and etc.
Thank you. And to read, also thinking about benefits, right? So I know that you have a lot of benefits that you think about when you think about AI. We had a hallway conversation the other day. I was like, I'm not really sure I understand that fully. And I immediately had a text to an AI generated link that he had sent me and had it all spelled out. So certainly someone who I would consider a very avid user. I am thinking about benefits, so how that has sort of changed your life in the last little bit in how you teach and learn and communicate with others. But I also do want to extend another thought to you too, because you have had the different areas that you have been speaking in. I'd also love for you to sort of highlight perhaps what areas are surprising you that you're having those talks about AI. So where are we seeing those benefits across the board?
There's a lot of things to mention. How many of you in the room have tried building your own GPT and ChatGPT? So this is one of the many emerging things that we'll see rapid change in these tools. ChatGPT moved to a tool that you could use in a hands-free way, which means students can talk to the phone and it will respond in English. When I was in the cafe the other day, one of our Japanese language instructors spoke to it in Japanese and responded in Japanese verbally. ChatGPT just in the last month released the ability for students to access a GPT for free, which means if I want to create an AI assistant, I can design something and coach it around a series of PDFs, and it can coach that student trained on whatever instructions that I'm giving in natural language. I don't even need to know Python like this and anything to be able to code it. You can go home and create one today. And I've been doing a lot of these, just sort of, there's a group in Tucson, at the University of Arizona, they have a program called Managing Science Achievement. We built out a model, just a prototype to train students in middle school or high school on how to follow the engineering design process. And it aligns with requirements for a 14-page engineering challenge that includes requirement of coding and alignment with UN guidelines and following an iterative process that's human-centered. And so it guides them through their own process, especially for a specific school that we're thinking of on the Native Nation in Babuquiri, which is a rural district. How do we get engineers to go out and volunteer? It's very difficult. But having an AI assistant there is really an interesting and promising opportunity. Even within our own infrastructure for knowledge-based articles, we're training it on knowledge-based articles as assistants to say, okay, well, how do we create a video in Panopto? What is a quick summary and how can I learn more? These are kind of fun use cases that are new, and every week there's a new use case. 11 labs, I lost my voice. I let 11 labs speak for me and narrate a long instructional video. And it sounded just like it. Nobody knew any better. And I did include transparently that note. But there's a lot of interesting new things happening, I would say, in a few days. And the new things, are sometimes problems, but for me, problems are opportunities. The last thing I'll get to would be, I did a talk back in January with Detroit. We've been doing keynotes around AI with leaders and students, some student panels, but mostly with leaders and faculty. They were not using AI aggressively in Detroit. Now they are. Faculty members are aggressively using it, and students are aggressively using it. If you want to learn more about national use, look at the Titan Partner study from the fall. It's very interesting. What's happening now is they need to figure out how to respond educatively to the perceived misuse of AI. And so that's an opportunity to revisit, what is compassionate assessment look like in terms of our role as, we're not supposed to be policing institutions, we're educational institutions. How do we think about how to support students on their pathways so they stay with us rather than having that sort of feeling like you're slapped in the face from getting an ash that you didn't really know. So no clear policy, there was no clear expectation setting, et cetera. How do we create processes that prevent a crisis, but also respond to a crisis? That's a positive. There's so many of them. There's just dozens and dozens of new opportunities that are emerging, both by the technology and by the way the technology is used.
So, thank you. Which is really interesting as we think about three panelists with really unique perspectives of how AI is used, the different experiences with that. You still see that human-centric vein throughout those, right? Whether it's thinking about role playing and how that improves the learning experience and creates a safe space for students to interact and develop those communication skills, whether you're thinking about people and their intellectual property and how we can ensure that safety and data, and then certainly how we can use AI thoughtfully to be able to provide that assistance. So the human-centric approach to everything is what I think is really something that you can resonate with. So I am going to ask this next question, but I am going to look at the audience first because you might already have a question, but I am going to pause after this next response. So if you don't have a question, I got a list. But if you do have a question, you'll get the opportunity momentarily. So we talked a little bit about the benefits, some of the reasons that we might think about embracing AI. And I know we're excited about that, but we also know it's not all magic and rainbows. I think that we want to also be thinking about some ethical considerations, how we build that trust and transparency in AI and education. We're thinking about student privacy and data security, and perhaps just some times where it hasn't quite gone well. So what is a not so good use case of AI? So I would like to turn to you now, and this time I'll start with you, Reed.
So I do a lot of workshops, just like volunteer gigs in town. I did a workshop for the Native American Science and Engineering program 2 weeks ago in the morning, and it was on ethics and AI. It's a really interesting question to delve into as it relates to the history of the appropriation of indigenous knowledge and colonial considerations relating to what is digital or indigenous digital sovereignty. What does that look like? So I first started off with what are the questions you care about as it relates to ethics with all the students and students. And then we said, okay, well, how does AI exacerbate or complicate those ethical issues? I strongly believe the students need to own these issues and drive it forward. We can't answer it for them. Two students did interesting things that surprised me. One of them was saying, first thing she did was ask AI, what about mining on native nations and specifically Navajo nations? And it gave a table, pro and con, and she had just written a 10-page paper. And this was very affirming for her because the main points that she had considered were kind of reinforcing her scope of analysis. She'd already done the cognitive work, but the tool kind of helped her affirm. And then somebody else said that we cannot be giving these tools indigenous knowledge that's going to be co-opted by any group that don't give us authorship and acknowledgement. So the question of what kind of knowledge we use to train the model is contentious. Representation is important as well because you don't want to be excluded from the results of the AI tool. They're just messy questions. Another messy question, or positive question, I should say, is another student came up to me and she said, you know what? We need something to help preserve our language. And she's going to be exploring how to use AI-assisted tools to preserve language. But we just got into the messy questions. And I gave them some examples like, Vanderbilt using AI after a school shooting. Probably not a good idea. They ended up in the news. Professors who don't understand AI who try to use ChatGPT as an AI detection tool for class. Front page. There's a lot of interesting misuse and concerns. Water and energy is also like a crisis point in terms of to be honest, it is a concern in terms of the high consumption of energy and water by tools. These are messy tools, but this is the car going around the corner. We're in the horse and buggy right now. We have to, I think, we want to wait for the first car crashes before we set up streetlights and guardrails. We want to sort of guide it forward. My goal is to stay ahead of it and to look at these messy use cases as opportunities to develop healthy, equitable, ethical, transparent practices.
Thank you. I like that idea. I was thinking about that, those streetlights, right, and what those look like at your institution. Perhaps they're just orange, right? We're just not sure quite yet, but a good place to start. And to you, Katie, about some downfalls and implications.
Right. So in case it wasn't obvious from my data security reasons before, I think that one of the things that concerns me the most about AI is a matter of trust, not only in terms of kind of the backgrounds, like the company that supplies the AI and relying on them, or relying on them to kind of have the best interest, but also just trust in the product that it can be reliable in terms of what it responds and what it spits out, which can't always be completely consistent, I think still. Maybe it will as it gets refined earlier on, but I think that the more responsibility and the kind of more serious roles that we give to AI, I'm very concerned about not moving too fast, or at least putting some guardrails and checks in place to have it be at least as accountable as the person that it might potentially replace in the profession or subject matter expert or what have you. So yeah, that's something that I feel like is just gonna have to break before most people would even realize that it's a problem.
It's good to be thoughtful about that, right? And really be intentional about how we're examining those practices before before it's, there's a lot of those car crashes that we referenced. Ronnie, and I think, to you, when I think about some of those potential for things that go wrong and what can happen. I know there's a lot of enthusiasm around the idea that role play as an effective use for AI. What could go wrong though, and how are some maybe not so good use cases of a tool like Character AI?
Well, since many of the characters of character AI since they can mimic historical figures and celebrities, there is a great concern about accuracy and misrepresenting their ideas, their values, and beliefs. So accuracy in this case really depends on the data that these chatbots are trained on. And so, with that being said, it's very important to have that disclaimer that these chatbots make things up as they go.
I exactly what I feel about, which is just that these AI tools will reproduce the best and worst. Incredibly, astonishingly accurate and astonishingly wrong. And sometimes will represent in language and English things that are quite offensive. And so our role in helping students navigate knowledge is, and utilizing character AI, you have disclaimers probably or guidance for your students on what to expect.
Oh, absolutely. It's really more of guidance just to help them with conversational building. I think in historical context, I'm not too sure if that may be a best case scenario. I think it's just more for strengthening relationships in general.
Thank you. So I am going to look to our audience now. We do have time for a question or two before we move on, and you can certainly feel free to ask one of all of our panelists, or if you just have one that you're thinking of and something that's on your mind. If there's any questions out there, yeah.
So looking at that, I see, looking at that as looking at the accuracy, I'm looking at that as something that will evolve and look when you see how fast things are evolving. I'm not worried about this. But one of the things that we're worried about, like data disappearing or the codifying, like I'm worried about us, not about the other side. Like we're killing the codifying part of the process of our way of thinking. So it's similar to when you lose your skills with math, when you have always that later in front of you. So that kind of things that happened with me. I'm a developer, part of the things that I do. So like moving and being able to create things 10 times faster. I'm looking at that. But I started to like lose some of the patterns. I started like it's doing everything on my behalf. That's it. So that kind of codifying part of the information is disappearing. And this is something like I wanted to elaborate on that in your experience.
So maybe just sort of looking at how that heavy reliance on that was that for sure. So, and I think that's a really great place to start is thinking about our students and how we want them approaching things, and then perhaps reflecting back on that. So to that point, how are we mitigating that when we think that our students are relying too heavily on AI to kind of get through, perhaps not developing some of those skills that they need to.
I have a lot to say on every topic, so I don't want to speak too much. I will say that one of the things I've been aggressively on is preserving the kind of work with our students. And what does a transparent AI practice look like? All that in my college and some writing I've done, a tap practice. If students are expected to share the full transcript, that's preserving their kind of work, the constructive record, distinguish with AI. The class that I built up for teaching and learning, likewise, in every single activity, we include a link at the bottom of every page to either ChatGPT or Gemini, or a link to a Google Doc that gives the full transcript from Claude. It at least shows, okay, well, what coding processes involved. Our coding faculty are facing a similar dilemma to you in terms of it's not a writing process question, it's a coding process. How do we preserve the awareness of the practices that help with beginning to learn Python? What she shifts is doing is what we should all be doing. It's not thinking about product, but moving towards process and asking our students to teach each other and do video recordings where they're accountable to their peers in a social space. And they have to teach each other what are the things that we consider when building this code. Because you can have, and you should be able to hack code. The coders right now are using GitHub Copilot to increase their productivity 40%, and been for a long time. We want them to be AI ready when they get in the marketplace. but we want them to also be able to explain through speaking, what is your cognitive process as you move through? And that's one thing we can do with educators is rethink the essay. And I teach writing as well. That's a dilemma for me, because writing is thinking, and I love it. But how do we rethink other ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge? One of them is chunked metacognitive reflection, another one is database learning, another one is text annotation, or taking notes in a live document that's shared. Does that help? Okay.
Ronald, I wanted to actually, look to you too, because I think while we explored those benefits of what that role play looks like, you also noted some of the potentials for inaccuracies, right? Or misrepresentation of a historical figure, for example. Reed alluded to the idea of having, the AI version of Reed, teach something, right? And I think there were some people that were like, well, interesting, and then some people in the audience, I was like, wow, right? That's startling, right? To sort of see that. So again, as we look to a question like that, and we think about that human connection, doing a lot of that in an online setting, in a virtual setting, are there concerns or responses to how students are interacting in a virtual setting versus with humans?
Yeah, so from some course feedback, we actually had really overall positive feedback from students saying that they felt that these online conversations are missing from online learning, and that they enjoyed, just going back and forth with the answers as opposed to doing more, just more research on their own. And it just feels more human centered, and that's why I feel. So I feel that this compared to traditional learning styles, or this creates just that more fun and engaging way for students to take a part.
I don't have much to add in terms of covering anything that Reed didn't already cover. I think that, yeah, like to me, the biggest, the most important way to look at it is rethinking the way that we create activities and assessments to move away from just regurgitation and basically what most plagiarism, in my view, is right now is an automated process of taking a text or a Wikipedia page and synthesizing that. Only now we have a computer to do it for us. I think that the key for educators is to rethink the way that we format the assignments and the activities so they can be more experiential, more personal, and more engaging, which is literally more human. Like these are skills that we should have already been thinking of reimagining, I think, before any of the process of it has been on board.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating way to look at that, actually, is thinking about how we could have explored that differently, and we're only forced to now, right? In the same ways that we only realized throughout the pandemic that we were actually not providing the online experience for students who were exclusively online. We kind of got to that point where, oh, now that it involves everybody, we are actually going to explore this. And so I do think, like, to your point earlier too, that you talked about that idea of, when we have a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? That's sort of that quote that comes to mind for me, is those are those things that we need to think about and re-examine and look at what assessment looks like, and certainly look at how students connect. So whether it's in a virtual setting or it is online, we know dating back to 2019, there was a research study that 30% of students dropped out because they were lonely. And I mean, that's a really difficult thing to grasp. But in an online setting, that's very real, right? So if it is connecting with AI, as I want to think it's certainly something that feels that connection still. I do think we have time for one more question if there's something else that is, right up front.
Last year, the CTO of OpenAI suggested that the education is an especially interesting use case for what they're doing. And she pointed to this on-help learning, genetic personalized learning way that would have been inconceivable without these schools. So, an individual student would have potentially, every level of, it would be tailored to their particular level, to their interests, their, if you're a baseball fan, physics examples would be about, curveballs, et cetera, right? And so there's this notion of a sort of post-industrial education. And I wonder, and you mentioned this actually, the social aspect, loneliness. And so the farther we go when we're pursuing this dream, are we actually avoiding or intensifying that isolation and loneliness through the very technology?
I have a bunch of stuff to say about that. Let's see if I can get some thoughts first. Using character AI. Does that create isolation or does it make them feel more connected?
So after using some examples of it, I was going to give an example of how I recently used it. Just preparing for this panel, I actually programmed character AI to be Lindsay as I had a phone conversation with this fake Lindsay, and did I feel isolated? I know, I actually felt very confident. I felt more confident with it because her responses to my answers were what I needed to improve my presentation. And so you think that they're scripted, but they actually sound pretty authentic to an extent.
But you can't allocate anything outside of its, I guess, like, kind of, if you ask it something totally out of pocket or
That's
wild.